My name is Hayley and today we're going to be sketching clay figures from ancient civilizations. This lesson is meant for people who are in high school or younger if they have parental permission, because we're going to be talking about like fertility statues that may or may not be understandable to people depending on their maturity level. But aside from that, the activity is good for all ages and it's going to be really fun. It's a two-parter, so today we're going to be sketching and getting ready for what we're going to do next week. And then next week we're going to be actually making what we sketched.
Neolithic times, Venus and Friends. Venus figurines are a special kind of clay statues made in the Upper Paleolithic period, usually Gravettian, which was around 24,000 to 19,000 BCE. They were mainly found in Europe, but some were discovered as far as Siberia. The Venuses, Venae, are linked by certain traits like being portable and having no real use. Even statuettes created after the main period they were found in are included in the Venus category. The name Venus comes from a 19th century French archaeologist who decided to call the statue he found Venus impudica, or immodest Venus, since she had a visible pubic mountain opening, to contrast with the modest Venus statues of ancient Greek times. The immodest Venus has long legs and less prominent chest than other Venuses, so some archaeologists think she's a figure of a younger age than the other Venuses. Some other scholars hate this term and believe it to be old-fashioned because it makes assumptions about ancient society and can bias your view of the artifacts. Christopher Whitcomb says about his disagreement, quote, "The ironic identification of these figures as Venus pleasantly satisfied certain assumptions at the time about primitive, about women, and about taste," end quote. For the purpose of this lesson, I will still be using the term Venus and referring to these statues as she, because many of the miniature statues just have the word Venus in their names, and it could be confusing if I didn't. Many archaeologists debate about whether certain figurines count as Venuses or not. They factor in the time period, construction material, and appearance when personally deciding if a statue is Venus. The Venus statues tend to exaggerate feminine traits such as wide hips, a large chest, and do not usually have arms or legs as prominent. This could be to keep the focus on the main part of the body, or possibly because it would make them more fragile to have the arms or legs coming off of the main body, and ones like that have been destroyed over time, leaving only the few with limbs that we have recovered. Unknown in purpose, they were possibly used as religious icons, fertility statues, or self-depictions by women artists. The theory that they are self-portraits comes from a more recent theory that the warped proportions are from women looking directly downward, since it is unlikely they would have had access to ancient mirrors. Looking straight down would show a larger stomach and breasts with smaller feet and hands, just like in the Venus statues. Perhaps the most famous Venus statue is the Venus of Willendorf. It is very small like the other Venuses, about 4.5 inches tall. Part of the reason Venuses are small is likely so they were easy to carry around from place to place, as the ancient humans were nomadic, hunter-gatherers who moved following the animals. Venus of Willendorf was likely made 30,000 years ago, but it was only discovered in 1908. Archaeologists use a technique called radiocarbon dating to figure out when certain rocks, fossils, or ancient creations were made. They look at the amount of certain types of carbon called isotopes. An isotope is a type of element that has the same amount of protons in its nucleus as other elements of the same type, but a different amount of neutrons. The ones that scientists look at are 12 carbon, 13 carbon, and 14 carbon. It is written as 12 with a C next to it, 13 with a C next to it, or 14 with a C next to it. 12C and 13C are lighter, but 14C is heavier and radioactive. This means its nucleus is unstable because it's so big. 14C decays into 14N, or 14 nitrogen, over time, and then it becomes 14CO2, or carbon dioxide. The 14CO2 is absorbed into plants through photosynthesis and becomes part of the food chain. Everything in the food chain will have the same ratio of 14CO2 to 12CO2. Just like us, too. Radioactive decay can be used to date things by comparing the ratio of C14 and C12 at the same time something had died, or was used to make the ratio to figuring out when the time of death or creation of the rock was. Every 5,730 years, the amount of C14 in an object halves itself into nitrogen. This will split in half again after another 5,730 years. This can be measured into about 55,000 years ago, but it isn't as easy as it sounds because the amount of C14 to C12 isn't always consistent. It goes up and down, which makes things really hard to match the ratio to the time period. This is why there's such a wide range we date things in, with error margins of over 1,000 years sometimes, like in the case of Miss Venus of Wellendorf, who is about 30,000 years old, but could also be as young as 25,000 years old, according to some calculations. Back to the statue. She is very small, like I said, with most of the body being her middle and head. The circular pattern on her head is possibly hair or perhaps a head covering. If you look closely, you can see very thin arms above her breasts, some sort of pointing them downward. She has large thighs and calves too in comparison to the thin arms. My favorite part of the statue is definitely the head with the cool pattern that may or may not be hair. The oldest known Venus figurine is the Venus of Holy Fels, likely 35,000 to 42,000 years old. She is the first non-disputed three-dimensional representation of a human being, and perhaps the oldest depiction period depending on different aging techniques. She has a small but still human head. The only humanoid statue that is older is the Loenmensch, or Lion Man. The Lion Man is 12.2 inches tall and has a lion head but an otherwise human body despite the name. The lion's head does not have a mane, meaning it's a female lion's head. But even with this information, the only way to know for sure if ancient humans intended it to be a male or female statuette is to look at the genitals, and archaeologists have different opinions on what they see. The Venus of Holy Fels has a large chest, tiny head, and thick arms, a large pubic mound, and short legs. She is 2.4 inches tall and was most likely worn as a necklace amulet. The material used to make the Venus of Holy Fels was a mammoth tusk. Most scholars theorize that she was likely a fertility goddess who was worn to bring prosperity in the form of reproduction and food to the community, but nothing is certain unless a time machine is invented, so take all assumptions about ancient times with a grain of salt. Now, you may be wondering, why are most of the figures found inside or near caves? Does that mean that all humans lived in caves or for shelter while traveling? The answer to the latter is maybe, but we do know more about the former in the way of survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is a logical error that many people fall into when looking at a problem or theorizing about the past. It can lead you to overlooking key facts and instead focusing on a more optimistic view. A famous example is that planes during World War II returned from fighting with bullet holes in them, especially around the tips of the wings and cockpits. Engineers thought the best way to improve the planes would be to reinforce areas that were shot frequently, until a statistician named Abraham Wald pointed out that these were the planes that made it home. This means the areas that were shot were places a plane could be shot and still make it back to base. Places without any damage on the plane were likely spots that would fell a plane should they be damaged, and protecting those spots would be a better use of resources. To apply this to ancient relics, it is almost certain that there were way more statues, pottery, and amulets made during ancient times, and we only have a fraction of them today. The ones we find in mostly one piece are the ones that have not been destroyed by weather, animals, or other humans. This means the best spots to find well-preserved artifacts are places where they have less contact with the world, like inside caves or under layers of rock. This does not mean humans did not live in caves. We have evidence that they did. But it could mean there were other places of shelter, like portable huts or permanent seasonal ones that they would travel to once every few months, depending on the movement of the animals. Dogu. Now, we will make a big jump forward out of Europe to roughly 14,000 to 400 before Common Era Japan. This period of time is called the Jomun period. There are 6 sections of the Jomun period called incipient, initial, early, middle, late, and final. The Jomun period has incredibly cool statues and pottery with amazing geometric patterns. These were made of clay and are ceramic, unlike many of the carved Venuses of the Upper Paleo era. Jomun people were hunter-gatherers as well, but they also dabbled a little bit in farming beans. The special clay statues made in this area are Dogu. Dogu are humanoid and made from clay. Around 10,000 BCE, they were more abstract and small, but in 4,000 BCE, they began to have obvious limbs and heads, although very simple. 1,000 years later, and they have full faces. All Dogu are highly stylized and not meant to be pure representations of humans, we think. There have been over 20,000 different Dogu found in Japan, mostly in eastern Japan, but they have been found all over except for the island of Okinawa. There is some debate as to what gender Dogu are supposed to represent, if any. Almost all Dogu were found broken, but some perfectly preserved ones have been found while others have been repaired. Archaeologists debate whether or not it was done on purpose by the creators, since the breaks are rather clean. This intentional breakage is most likely key in understanding the purpose of Dogu. Some scholars believe them to be fertility statues, since some Dogu have visible breasts, or maybe toys for children, but others believe it was part of the mystic practices and religion of the Jomun people. Those who believe it may have been part of mysticism say that the Dogu were made and then broken in order to cure illnesses and physical problems by passing the problem along to the clay dolls. Almost all Dogu were found broken, but some perfectly preserved ones have been found while others have been repaired. Archaeologists debate whether or not it was done on purpose by the creators, since the breaks are rather clean. This intentional breakage is most likely key in understanding the purpose of Dogu. Some scholars believe them to be fertility statues, since some Dogu have visible breasts, or maybe toys for children, but others believe it was part of the mystic practices and religion of the Jomun people. Those who believe it may have been part of mysticism say that the Dogu were made and then broken in order to cure illnesses and physical problems by passing the problem along to the clay dolls. The first Dogu I'll show is called the Jomon Venus. She has breasts, arm outstretched, and her legs are uneven as though she is walking. Her head is a patterned hairdo as well as a clear nose, eyes, and mouth. The Jomon Venus appears to have been of a pregnant woman's subcategory of Dogu. There are enough Dogu resembling pregnant people that the theory of Dogu representing a fertility goddess or protecting spirit to help with childbirth has gained traction among some scholars. Another theory is that while it does stand for fertility, it is for the earthen kind, since the Jomun people were starting to get involved in a small amount of agriculture. This Dogu was made in the Middle Jomun period around 2500 to 1500 BCE and was found in Tanabatake. The Jomun Venus has all limbs intact, unlike the next one I'll show you. This Dogu from Morimachi, Hokkaido, in northern Japan, was found among many others and is a favorite of many. It has a distinct swirling pattern and is missing its left arm. The decorations on it are similar to a popular swirling cloud motif from pottery at the time. Traces of red pigment had been found on it. Perhaps it was a lovely red back in its heyday? The eyes have visible pupils, or perhaps look like Inuit goggles. There are enough Dogu with this facial feature that there is a whole category of them called simply Goggles Dogu. Most Goggles Dogu are from late Jomun and were hollow. This classic Dogu is not only wearing the goggles, but has a wonderful hat or headpiece. It was from the final Jomun time period and is found in Tajiri. It has all limbs intact and sports an intricate pattern traveling from the headpiece down to the neck, breast, and middle, stopping just above the legs. It has multiple fingers and is in amazing condition, given that all the details are still visible. I love the patterns it has, and I'm in awe of how much time it would have taken to put each individual detail on it. Although this lesson is going to be about clay dolls, I also want to show you some pottery from the Joe Moon period to get your creative juices flowing. The intricate details are mesmerizing and complex. Joe Moon pottery was not made with a wheel but sculpted by hand, so it could not be as perfectly even if that was the intent, although usually it was not. The pottery shifted styles as time went on. The bottoms of the vessels would be either flat or rounded, and the walls of the pots would be thick or thin, depending on which section of the Joe Moon period you look at. The next period of time in Japan is called the Yayoi period. Had settlers move in from the west and brought with them all sorts of new pottery skills and practices. The style radically shifted from this extreme and wild style to more smooth and minimalist fashion, and the Dogu disappeared with the old ways of pottery without being incorporated in the new society. It's a little mysterious that they entered into the culture really slowly and then changed in style only to be stopped being made completely at the end of the era. Mississippian. The last time period we will be talking about takes place right where we are here in the southeastern United States. The period started around 800 Common Era and ended as recently as 400 years ago, around 1600 Common Era. This is the last and most recent time period we will cover. Found in the Midwest and southeast of America, the Mississippian native population is very likely related to Native Americans from the southeastern states today, but there is no found link to any specific tribe. The people of this time period still hunted and gathered, but they were also farmers and stayed in one spot, unlike the nomadic hunter-gatherers of the Neolithic times. The tool they used for hunting was the more refined bow and arrow, in contrast to the spears of more ancient people. They were able to live in large groups thanks to their talent at farming, with possibly 1,000 people living in the larger Mississippian towns and smaller cities. The largest city was Cahokia. Cahokia was located near St. Louis, Missouri, and housed over 20,000 people. The Mississippian people are known for their large earthen mounds, as well as their art and pottery. They would make mounds of earth that could reach incredible heights, and use these mounds to conduct political or religious meetings upon. While they sculpted human and animal figures from clay and stone, my favorite thing the Mississippians created were shell and rare stone gorgets. A gorget is a pendant worn on the chest via a string, like a large necklace. The gorgets had symbols, animals, or small people on them. Their pottery also had beautiful stylized patterns on them. Some pots have swirling patterns, but others look like heads. While many are stylized like the statuettes of the past, there are a few head pots that look very realistic and show talent for creating individual facial characteristics. The head pots are rare and unique, numbering around 140 total recovered. They are made of clay and decorated with pigment or paint. Some of them have perforations showing where piercings may be. They are thought to be death masks or representations of the dead. Most of the head pots are found between Arkansas and Missouri. It is thought they were buried as offerings for the dead after being decorated with feathers and filled with materials that may help the deceased in the afterlife. But what we know about the practices of the Mississippian people is mostly based on biased records from explorers combined with the oral history of Native American tribes that are thought to be descended from the Mississippians. There are actually a bunch of different groups under the umbrella of Mississippian culture called that are all distinct, although linked by proximity. The Caddo people lived more southwest than the other Mississippian groups in Louisiana and East Texas. There is a parish here named after them. The Caddo people's pottery was constructed with a large amount of technique and exhibits a black luster. Compared to the other Mississippian pottery, it is smoother, more symmetrical, and thinner. To get the dark coating, a slip made of paint and clay was used on, then it was polished with a stone to become shiny. One of the other large group are rare, but they do exist, who lived along Arkansas section of the Arkansas River. The Kappa people were the last of the major Mississippian groups to emerge, dating around 1500 CE. The vessels are known for having bright reds, whites, and blacks, and interesting animal shapes. Most of their pottery was in effigy form and was highly realistic. Some of the different things they made out of clay were frogs, humans, deer, dogs, otters, and shells. While animal or person in shape, they are often colored with patterns, usually swirls or circles. Hopefully these few time periods and cultures will have your gears turning just in time for our activity. Today we will be sketching out a plan to make our own ancient pottery next week. It is important to have a good amount of different ideas before going into something that could be permanent. But at the same time, clay and Play-Doh can be really shaped really easily, so it isn't too much pressure. We will be drawing our plan for our little clay people by drawing ideas for 4 angles: right, front, left, and back.
I think the most important thing to figure out when you want to make something three-dimensional is for it to have a good silhouette that's visible from all sides and still be interesting. I'm actually going to be using a charcoal pencil, but you can sketch in anything. I think that pencil's probably easiest, but this is just so that it appears on the screen. Now, when it comes to silhouettes, a lot of the ancient ones look sort of like this, where they have a visible head and then a body, and they don't really have arms or legs. Then there are also the Dogu that look kind of like this, and they have the weird hat, and then they look like this. So I want to do something interesting, and for that I'm going to actually do a lot, like a color over this. And I'm going to smear it with a pencil so that it's nice and gray. And I'm gonna use that as a base so that it works out nicely. So we got a head, but I don't want it to be I want it to be interesting. So it's like, I'll give it a hat, and I'll give it goggle eyes like the Dogu that look like this. Let's make that hat cool. Let's give it maybe a crown. And then from above, it would look sort of like this, with the face down here. So now that we've got that, and let's do some little dots. We can do that by poking it with a toothpick. And let's do this gently, but no, let's do more of this. Because it's a sketch, you can just draw whatever and it will be nice. Let's give it some arms that go inside so that it doesn't, it goes like this. And for legs, have them go like that. The legs are not going to be as important because the focus is going to be on the head since we made the head nice and big. And then from down below, it would look sort of like, those are the legs, these are the hands. Then from the back, from the side, let's do the side next. So the side would be like this with little dots on here. I want to make it interesting from the back, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it some hair, like that. Let's add that there, and add that there, and let's see. I want it to be interesting from all sides. So maybe there's the legs. The leg is like this. Hopefully it can balance, and if not, we can just have it stay on its back. Maybe let's make the legs thicker so it can stand. And let's see, what can we do? Well, let's give it a design. Kind of cloud swirling. Let's add that over here. I'm just doing it as I go so I can edit all of them at the same time so that they all match. And let's see, swirly, swirly, swirly. And little dots. These are the arms. 1, 2, 3. And let's do the back. Let's see, from the back, it would look the same as the front. It will have the same silhouette but reversed.
Let's make those legs thicker. And you can't really see the arms because it's from the back, but you can see the hat. Let's make a cool diamond design on the back just for the people in the back. They won't see it from the front, but when they go to the back, they'll be like, ah, I like this. And the swirly. And for the feet, let's give them little things like that. And because there's hair here, let's see, that should do it from all sides, just like that. And you can always sketch all sorts of other designs that you're interested in and then just pick the back one. I think that it's going to be really interesting to use something that has a lot of different interests from different points and a lot of geometric stuff like we saw on the Dogu, and then we can have the swirls on the Mississippian. And if you have different colors, you could paint it once you're done so that it's bright and colorful. I don't know, I'm very excited for next week.
I hope you enjoy this week's lesson. It's got your gears turning and you can think about what you want to have for next week. You could be something kind of realistic like what the Mississippians do, or something crazy stylized like the Dogu we talked about in Japan. Anything you want, just make sure that it's something you can actually create. Now, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you want to share what you sketched with us, send it on an email to info@communityworksla.org. And I'll see you next week.